Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're diving into a story you guys requested. Jake Bird.
Oh, this one's a doozy.
He's one of those figures in true crime that, if you're into it, you probably already know the basics, but
Right, but there's always more.
there's always more to the story. And we're going deeper, beyond just the headlines. We're going to get into this unsettling world of a man, Jake Bird, who claimed to have left behind a trail of victims across America.
Coast to coast.
Yeah. And our sources, they mainly focus on the crimes and the trial he had in Washington state back in 1947, but,
This guy's story goes way beyond that.
oh yeah, much more expansive. And one of the things that's so intriguing about Jake Bird is that, well, he challenged how people thought about serial killers way back then.
Yeah, at the time.
Yeah. So Jake Bird, he was born in Louisiana in 1901. Even his exact birthplace is kind of like shrouded in mystery.
Right off the bat, we've got a mystery.
Yeah. And the sources we've got, they paint a picture of a transient life, always moving. And he worked a bunch of different jobs.
Yeah, never settling down in one spot for too long, it seems.
Nope. He was working on the railroads, though. A tough job. They called it gandy dancing, laying and maintaining tracks.
Oh, wow. So that would have given him reason to be constantly on the move all the time, crisscrossing the country.
It would.
And maybe even a little know-how about how to disappear quickly, too.
Right. Makes you wonder if he used that to his advantage.
Absolutely, yeah. It's
You-
like he was a ghost, blending to the background wherever he went.
And here's the thing. Even before those 1947 murders, he was already racking up a pretty lengthy criminal record. Burglaries, assaults, the whole 9 yards.
So this wasn't just a sudden turn to darkness then. It sounds like this guy had a pattern of violence and disregard for the law. Almost like a buildup to something far more sinister.
And that something was brutal. The double murder of Bertha Klett and her daughter, Beverly June Klett, in Tacoma.
Yeah, their home was invaded. And can you imagine all they had to defend themselves was an axe?
I know. It just sends chills down your spine to even think about it.
It was brutal. And the way it happened really shook the community. Reading about it is one thing, but imagine being their neighbor and hearing those screams.
I can't even imagine.
It's the kind of thing that just stays with you,
Absolutely. And they caught Bird fleeing the scene red-handed.
Blasted.
He confesses, but he says, oh, those murders, just a burglary gone wrong.
A burglary gone wrong, huh?
All right?
But this confession, well, it's like opening Pandora's box. Bird drops a bomb. He claims he's committed 44 other murders
44.
across multiple states.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. You've got law enforcement agencies all over the country scrambling to re-examine cold cases, trying to make sense of this guy's confession.
It's crazy. Thinking about Bird's case, it's fascinating how it really just threw a wrench in the works of how everyone thought about serial killers at the time.
Yeah.
Criminologist Eric Hickey, he pointed this out. Back then everyone just assumed serial killers were like the stereotypical white guy.
Right.
But here's Bird, a black man, and he's targeting white women all over the country. It just didn't fit the mold.
It makes you wonder how much those assumptions, those biases, really messed with investigations, not just Bird's case, but so many others too.
It's a chilling thought. Cases that could have been solved, connections that could have been made earlier.
Exactly. And then you add in this whole Jake Bird hex. He's facing execution, and he claims that everyone who had anything to do with this trial is going to die before him.
Oh, come on. Talk about creepy.
It's like straight out of a horror movie. Think about it. You're a juror, a lawyer, even the judge, and this guy's put a curse on you.
Yeah, the psychological impact alone must have been immense.
No kidding. And get this, according to our sources, 6 people connected to that trial actually did die. The judge, a police officer, even one of Bird's own lawyers.
Wow, okay. But as spooky as that hex sounds, part of me wonders if it's just like a coincidence. 6 deaths over, several years? Statistically, it might not be as strange as it seems.
I see your point. Maybe we're just looking for patterns where there aren't any.
Right.
But you can't deny those deaths, they just add another layer of mystery and intrigue to this whole story. And initially, Bird's execution, it was set for January 1948. But then something happened. It delayed his appointment with the hangman.
Well, what's...
His claims about all those other murders.
Right.
They couldn't just ignore them.
Of course not. So they pushed back his execution to give everyone time to investigate.
They did. Imagine the pressure on law enforcement, the potential to solve all these cold cases, bring closure to families across the country.
Must have been immense. So what happened? Did those investigations lead anywhere?
They did. They really did. Police from all over different states, they went to interview Bird, and based on what he told them, they were able to confirm 11 more murders.
11 more.
Yeah, 11 families finally getting some answers. It's hard to grasp the ripple effect of his crimes, you know?
It really is. And on top of that, he remained a prime suspect in even more cases. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And Bird's case, it shows just how limited law enforcement was in the early 1900s. No DNA testing, no national databases. I mean, it was like trying to catch a ghost.
He was basically operating in a time before criminal profiling, before all the advanced forensics we have today.
Exactly. It's almost as if he was taking advantage of like gaps in the system.
And it makes you think, what if he hadn't been caught in Tacoma?
Right.
How many more victims would there be?
Oh, it's a chilling thought. But, his case also shows how far we've come in criminal investigation techniques. Now we have DNA, profiling, better communication between agencies, all these tools that make it a lot harder for someone like Bird to just slip through the cracks.
You're right. It's not just about catching the bad guys after the fact. It's about stopping these things from happening in the first place.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the Clutt murders, the confession, the whole hex thing, and the sheer number of possible victims. But what about the specifics of Bird's crimes, like his methods, his motivations? What do we know about that?
Well, from what we can tell from the sources, it seems like Bird's go-to weapon was an axe or a hatchet. These weren't like heat-of-the-moment things. These were brutal, efficient attacks, almost like disturbingly calculated.
Yeah, and it looks like he mainly targeted white women. Why do you think that might be, especially back then?
That's a tough one. Honestly, we might never really know for sure. Was it opportunity? Or was there something more to it? I think the real puzzle here is trying to understand the psychology behind these horrible acts.
It's unsettling to even try to think about what could be going on in the mind of someone who could do something like that. Bird's case, it happened in a very different time. Forensic science was just starting out. Communication between law enforcement wasn't always great. No national databases or anything like that.
Yeah, it was a perfect storm of circumstances that let him stay under the radar for so long. He was able to move all over the place, leaving a trail of victims, and it took a confession to finally start putting the pieces together. It makes you realize how vulnerable people were back then.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot. Bird's early life, his always-on-the-move lifestyle, the horrific Clutt murders, his shocking confession, the hex, all those other potential crimes. But there's one last part of his story we haven't really talked about yet, his final days and his execution.
Right. And it's important to remember that even though he committed these awful crimes, Bird still had rights under the law. He had a lawyer, the chance to appeal his conviction, and they investigated his claims about those other murders thoroughly.
And that says a lot about our legal system, even when dealing with someone as monstrous as Jake Bird.
Exactly. Everyone, no matter what they've done, deserves a fair trial. And in Bird's case, justice was served in the end. After he tried everything, even appeals to the Supreme Court, Jake Bird was hanged on July 15, 1949 at the Washington State Penitentiary.
Man, what a story. From a drifter to a confessed serial killer to the center of a supposed curse, Jake Bird's life was really something else. But it's more than just a story, right? It reminds us that humans are capable of some truly terrible things.
It does. It raises all these questions about criminal psychology, investigative methods, the nature of evil, what makes someone commit these kinds of acts, and how can we stop it from happening again? These are things we should all be thinking about.
Yeah. And it's scary to think that people like Bird can just blend in, hide in plain sight. He wasn't some creepy figure lurking in the shadows. He was a laborer, a railroad worker, someone you could pass on the street and never even notice.
Exactly. And that's what made him so dangerous. He used the very systems meant to protect people to his advantage.
It really is. It makes you wonder, if someone like Bird could operate under the radar for so long back then, what kind of challenges are we up against today, even with all the advancements we have?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sure, we got DNA and these big databases now, but criminals, they're always adapting, always finding new ways to exploit weaknesses. It's a never-ending game of cat and mouse.
Always trying to stay one step ahead. But I guess Bird's case also shows us how important it is to really try to understand what makes these criminals tick, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we could figure out the warning signs, maybe we could intervene sooner, maybe even stop these horrible things before they happen.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just react after the fact. We've got to be proactive, figure out the psychology of people like Bird, and understand what factors lead to this kind of violence.
It's a complicated problem, no doubt about it. You know, thinking about Bird's crimes, I keep coming back to those 11 families that finally got some answers after all those years of not knowing. That must have been such a mix of emotions, relief, grief, anger, maybe even a sense of closure.
It's hard to imagine what they went through, but it shows how long-lasting the impact of Bird's actions really are, how they still affect people today.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Bird's early life, his life on the road, the Clutt murders, that chilling confession, the hex, and the possibility of even more victims. And we talked about how his case shows the limitations of how law enforcement worked back then and how important the advancements we have today really are.
It's been quite a journey, that's for sure. From those old records to the darkest parts of the human mind. Jake Bird's story is a powerful reminder that anyone is capable of evil.
It reminds us that the world is full of good and bad, light and dark. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left feeling a little uneasy, but also grateful for how far we've come in understanding and fighting crime. What about you?
I'd say so, yeah. Bird's case, it's a dark chapter in American history, but it also makes us think. It forces us to ask those tough questions about ourselves, about society, and the systems we rely on for safety and justice.
Well, that's it for today. The unsettling and complicated story of Jake Bird. A man who moved like a ghost, leaving behind a trail of violence and so many unanswered questions. His case makes us want to dig deeper, to look beyond the surface and confront those uncomfortable truths about what it means to be human.
And I think the biggest thing we can take away from this is the need to stay aware, both in our own lives and in our communities. By trying to understand what motivates these horrible acts, by choosing empathy and compassion, we can work towards preventing these tragedies and make the world a safer, more just place for all of us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit unsettling. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.